Well, hello, and welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. This is the Ultimate API Challenge, a place where we work, grow, and learn together with different APIs as well as a variety of tech stack in order to, by the end, create an end result that you can put on your web development portfolio. In this video, I've heard you wanted something very beginner friendly, so I got you. We got HTML, CSS, JavaScript, a little bit of fetch, nothing too much. And I also heard that you want to code along from zero. Don't provide us starter files. Show us everything on screen, how you code it, how you come up with it. Well, not come up with it, but basically how the things are built. There is no secret behind it. It's really just building things up. Don't forget to check the ultimateapichallenge.com for more challenges. I'll link here all the videos that we have had already in the past if you feel like jumping to another one or if you're done with this one. Anyway, there's going to be also a lot of links in the description box below. Also, if you have any ideas, any requests, any feedback, or questions as well, then just put them in the comments below. I'm always reading them, answering them, and looking forward to them. So I guess now we can start. Let's go. As always, let me first show you what we're going to be building. Today we're using a QR code generator API, which is super fun, right? We're going to be building a UI in order to get some information from the user. So some settings, for example, the color of the QR code, the background color of it, sizes, formats, basically anything that the API offers us. We're going to create a little bit of like a user interface in order for the user to insert their parameters there and then generate the QR code, show it to the user, and then the user can just like save it as an image and voila, it's done. So we're gonna check the QR code generator API in just a sec. First, let me show you the UI. Here is our UI. Beautiful, stunning, I know. We have a QR code, kind of a title here going on, super fancy. Then we have a card, you can also call it the container, as long as you're clear on what this element is. We have an input field here that accepts text. Then we have two input fields here as well. Yes, those are input fields. I'm gonna go into details once we build that up. Then some other input fields and you guessed it, another input field. So anyway, once we have, let's say, hello, we can, now the button becomes active. This is something also we're gonna learn how to do. We can click on it and it gives us our QR code. Yay, applause, right? And also if the user wants to change something, they can just click go back. We can maybe change the background color, generate, and it changed. Awesome. Now, I know that I said that you don't need any code along files. They are here in the GitHub repository though, if you really want to start coding along with me only from the JavaScript part. I'm gonna put a chapter in the YouTube video, so like you're gonna know where JavaScript starts, the section of the video. But if you're here for the full code along, then let's jump to it. So the official API docs, let's open them. QR code API. Important features: create QR codes via internet, read scan QR code via internet. That doesn't matter to us. Let's go to API documentation. Let's go to the create QR code because we need to create a QR code. Go there. So there's like terms of services, quick start guide. Basically, they explain here how the URL looks like, what you should send to them, and also we have the parameters. Parameters are basically anything that is in a URL after a question mark. So let's go, for example, to google.com, flowers. You see here the URL, google.com, this is the domain. /search is a route within google.com domain. And then you have a question mark. Everything that comes after the question mark in a URL is called a parameter, a query parameter, URL parameter, basically a parameter. This is one parameter. So basically a Q equals flowers. So it's called key value and the key would be Q. Let me maybe show you another example with not Q. So source, yeah? Source would be the key. And the value of it is going to be HP. this is how URLs are named, constructed. It's a very common thing. So yeah, just wanted to get that out for us. And if we go back to our parameters, we can see many of them that they are offering. Wait, do they have? Yeah, we have them in the on the top here. So they have the data parameter, which is mandatory. So there is no way we can send a request without the data parameter. We could send it, but I already tried it. It gives you an error. So I don't know why would you do that? It's not going to give you anything. We have data size. As you saw in the UI, we are using size. Data is actually the one that is called, let's go back, text/URL, because you can really put anything here. The most common scenario would be that you put a URL, right? You just print a QR code in a restaurant or somewhere, or just maybe like as a sticker, and then people scan it, and that's going to be a URL. Rarely it's a text, but that's also possible if, let's say, you have some storage and you just want to put like tons of QR codes and, you know, program them to tell you what's inside of that storage. That could also be an option. Then we have some other parameters that we're not going to be using. We are going to be using the color parameter, background color parameter. Margin, no, but Q zone, which is quiet zone, yes. It's basically the same as margin, but in my opinion, it looked nicer. If you want to swap margin with Q zone, you can do that. And of course, we're also going to be requesting the parameter. Now that we have those, let's open our own file. If you have your code editor or your machine, what you can do is, or you can manually create a folder named whatever you want, the name of your project. You can name it QR code generator API, for example, or you can use the command line, same as I'm going to do right now. So first we need to create the folder, which is mkdir, make dir directory, called QR code generator API. There we go. And then we're going to cd to that. So we're going to go inside of it. And in here, we're going to create index.html. Then we're going to create style.css. And we're going to create script.js. That's it. Those are the three files that are going to do our freaking magic. And I have also a command to open this folder in my code editor, which is Visual Studio Code. All right, so we got it. So let's open that up. We're gonna start by really creating the very basic skeleton of HTML. I have some snippets and I can do the HTML5 and select it. So what it does, it has a doc type of HTML. It's a very basic boilerplate code. Basically, you have to define the standard. I'm not gonna go into that. If you wanna Google that, then for sure, check it out, why there is doc type, why was before, why wasn't. Our language is going to be English. Head is everything that we have kind of like hidden from the user, but known to the browser. Let's put it like that. Let's change the title of our document to QR code generator API challenge. Because why not? Also, let me make the font bigger so everybody can see everything. That should be good enough, right? By the way, if you have any questions about the theme that I'm using, I'm actually using my own theme called Ice Blue, crisp as an ice cube. You can download it in a Visual Studio Code. I'll also put below the information about the font, size, and so on if you want. And also the link to this theme. So let's continue. Also, we can add a favicon or favicon. I actually have one. Let me find it. This one. Boom. Yeah, Visual Studio Code is giving me some errors. I don't know why. You're gonna see it once we load the page where that's being shown. You should find the directory where you made the HTML file. Let me find mine and just open it. Here's our title, QR Code Generator API Challenge, and this is our little favicon. Okay, now we need to add our CSS file and our JavaScript file. So the way how we do that is we're using link and we're writing href and it's going to be style.css. See, it's already suggesting it. The relationship is style sheet. I don't know if that's relationship rel. We also need a thing called sanitize CSS. Let me just copy the link to it. We're not gonna add it like as a CSS file ourselves. We're just gonna get the information from that CSS file that exists somewhere in the cloud. What it basically does, it clears kind of like the default settings of browsers, which can be very different from browser to browser, and it kind of ensures that your design looks as unified throughout browsers as possible, although there is, until you actually test it, there is no actual guarantee that that's going to be the case, but it does a good amount of work in that regard. Then we will need to add in our body a script to add our JavaScript file. Here it's going to be source, not href. And the source is going to be, what's the name of it? Script.js. Yeah, there you go. So now if we go to script.js and we do a console .log, JS is loaded, save it. And let's go to the style CSS and maybe do body background color of red. No, that's too much. Royal blue. And we go to our page. See, it doesn't refresh, so we need to refresh it manually. It's blue, so we know our CSS works. Now we need to inspect to open DevTools in the browser, and whatever we console in JavaScript is going to be available in this console tab. And there we see JS is loaded. It's also very helpful because here it tells us actually where this line was executed in our code. So whenever you have like big files, it's actually super helpful. All right, next, you know what we can do? We can actually put those things side by side. There we go. All right, so the one thing that is a little bit annoying is that you always need to refresh manually your code. I found a little hacky hack in order to avoid that. Please don't push that into your GitHub. This needs to be removed once this goes into like production. So once you deploy it somewhere, or when you make it accessible to other people, this should not be there. So I'll just add a to-do, remove before finishing. We can actually put it on here on top. Cool, so now if we, for example, going to remove this, save it, and then, okay, that was a bad example. Wait, first save it. And now this thing will need to change. We put it like to 60 seconds, because if you put it more often, then your machine might overheat. Let's start with the very simple one, QR code and an underline in here. We're still gonna wait until this refreshes itself. Does it have it in the head? Yeah, it has the refresh. There we go. You saw that? Awesome. Now in our body, let's create an H1, which is going to be QR code. Save it. Also, let's go back to the body and remove the... Well, we actually are going to have another color. It's just not going to be royal blue. Color is going to be this beautiful, I want to say eggshell. Sort of an eggshell, right? Maybe ivory. I don't know. Depends how you see it on your screen. It can be very different. As you can see, it's a little bit different to what we have. It has some paddings, which we still didn't add. So a little hiccup. My editor was not saving things, and I forgot the prettier file. If you want to add this one, it's called .prettierrc. Feel free to stop the video, and it's going to format your code for you. So that's really, really nice. Or you can also just do that manually. If that doesn't work for you, then you need to add prettier extension in Visual Studio Code. Our H1, we're in the style. H1, let's give it some nice touch. We know that the font family is going to be different. In a second, we're going to tackle that. However, we want to add a border bottom to it in order to have like this line. And it's going to be 1 pixel solid gray. I didn't have much of imagination. Boom. The line is now throughout the whole page, and that's because an H1 tag by default has, let me show you, a display of block. And block means that it takes the whole space of the page. In order to change that, we can change the display property to inline block, which will make it kind of like adjusted to the content inside of the H1 tag. So if we refresh it, you see that now it's very shrinked and small. But in our case, it's a little bit out there, and this we can sort of manipulate with some padding. So we can do padding right is going to be 2 rem. If you're not familiar with rem, those are relative units to pixels. Basically, 1 rem usually equals to 16 pixels. There are calculators online where you can kind of calculate. I already do it by eye. Relative units are considered better because they are more accessible to people. So let's say a user prefers their font to be as a default 24 pixels instead of 16, then 1 rem is going to be 24 pixels. Those pixels are coming from the browser. So if the user goes to the settings of the browser and they change that to 24 pixels, it means that they want the whole experience of every website to be enlarged, right? Because that's what they want. And if we're gonna set everything in pixels, then that might not achieve that. However, REMs do help us achieve that, and they are my favorites. So when it comes to paddings, especially big paddings, not when it's 1 pixel, but when it comes to bigger units or bigger measures, then I would always opt in for REMs. That's just a side note from me. Then we can also add some padding to the bottom. Padding bottom can be 0.5 rem to have a little bit of space there. And of course, the whole thing needs to have some space here. And instead of adding that to the H1, I'd rather add it to the whole body. Because what if you have some content that goes under, you would need to add padding to it as well. And just like to save you all this hassle, it's easier if that's in the body for this project. Padding is 0 and 2 rem. 0 means that it's top and bottom are 0. We're not touching that because we also have the padding or the margin from the H1 that comes with it. You can see here, it already has 21 pixels as a top margin, so we don't need to add there. And if we refresh, now it's moved a little bit and it looks a little bit nicer. Alrighty, now we need to add some font families. Font families I usually add from Google Fonts because I think it's a really nice resource. Google Fonts, it's for free, and you can have a lot of fonts there. Like sometimes they suggest you how you can combine fonts, and you can really search the ones that you want. So since I already have the fonts, let me grab them. And yes, it's quite a bit of a chunk of code, but this is how it looks like to make the font kind of downloaded to your project. It's the same how we did it here with the sanitized CSS, and the code you usually can find if you select one of the fonts, you click select the style, then you're gonna have it here, and here is your code to copy. And then they also tell you how you can use that in your CSS. And that's what we're gonna be doing. Also, just tiny information. We selected a font family called Canit with a weight of 700. That's gonna be like the main bold font for us. Then we have also Work Sans, which has a 200 and a 400 and a 500. Actually, I don't think I used the 500. We'll see. So this is gonna be more the main font, and the Canit is gonna be like a, the fancy one. So since the generic font is going to be font family, is going to be Work Sans. Let me copy that here. The font weight of it, the default one, is going to be 400. That's sort of the base font weight for many fonts. And then we said that for our H1, we want a little bit of a fancier font. So if we refresh now, there you go. So now it looks almost the same. Oh, it's capitalized. We don't need that. So let's do code. And now it's going to look identical. There you go. Awesome. Cool. We got our H1. So let's continue with the rest. For our main thing, we're going to use the main tag, which is basically telling the browser that that's where our main content is going to be in. I know that some people usually use just like divs all over the place, but I'm trying to be more conscious about the proper skeleton of HTML. I'm no way perfect in that, but I guess we could start paying more attention to it since it's there for a reason. So first thing that we have is this little card. It's going to be section. And the first section, we're going to have 2 of them because the card flips or the container flips. So we're going to have 2 of them. And the first one, we're going to give it an ID so we can better target it. The ID is going to be QR code settings. And then we're going to add some classes to it, container and container front. Now, I didn't have any convention of naming the CSS classes. Yeah, I just decided to go with the flow, so that's what we're getting today. Within that section, we're going to have a header for our headline of the card, and we're going to use an H2 and an H3. Why we're doing H2 and an H3 is because, first of all, it's hierarchy. You have first H1, which is the main thing, and then you have an H2 and an H3. So kind of like as you go through the page, you should have, you know, them going lower and lower and lower, because if for some reason you have H6 on the top and then H1 at the very, very bottom, maybe in the footer, that just doesn't make sense. And also a note, there should be only one H1 on the page. That's just like SEO, Google stuff, robots. If you want separate information about that, let me know in the comments. So H2 was generate your QR code. Yeah, like this. And the H3, let's open it here. Adjust settings below to make your QR code look as you want. All right. Now let's refresh. Nice. So because we don't have anything in this container class, let's add it. Dot container. The background color of the container is going to be white because we want to have some contrast. So if we're saving this, you see, we're already getting there. We're getting there. Then we want to have some border radius of 1 rem. I'm not going to refresh it. It's going to refresh itself once in a while. And then starts like the width. We don't want the width to be like too big, too small, but we also want to have it a little bit of responsive. Actually, what I usually do, well, I don't usually do that. That's not true. I usually use a framework for that, like a CSS library. But since we're coding everything from scratch, let me show what those libraries kind of do behind the scenes. Behind the scenes? Yeah, I guess. So we're going to define that the width of it is 50%. However, if we refresh it, our 50% on a bigger screen looks fine. But once it gets smaller, the 50%, and it can go even smaller, it's going to be very, very small. And on mobile phone, you don't need the content to be 50%. You can have it up to 90, right, of the full screen. I mean, it's like a mobile device. You want to use all the asset of the screen that you get there. Kind of like the standard width is going to be 50%. But then you can define a minimum width, something that the container cannot go lower than. And in our case, the min width is going to be 300 pixels. Again, if to your taste it feels a little bit too small, make it bigger. That's fine. Or vice versa. Maybe you can think it can go even smaller. Absolutely fine. And then we're going to define a max width, because what if our screen is a 4K TV? We don't want that to be 50% of that screen. We want to still limit the width of it. In this case, it's going to be 500 pixels. And if we save it and refresh it, you can see that it's not going smaller than. Now it's going to grow a little bit bigger. Yeah. But then it stopped growing because it reached the max. Cool. Really cool, if I say so myself. Then our min height is going to be 700 pixels. This min height, I came to it just by having all the elements there and then having the card flipped, and I saw how much of a height we need, and that's how I established it. I didn't just come up with 700 pixels just because, although it seems like that, but I didn't. Then what we want to have is to have this container centered, and for that we have our main tag that we can use. So let's go to main, and we're gonna do a display flex and then a justify content center. Yeah, and also align items center. What it basically does, it centers the element across all axes. Well, the X and Y. So the X is justify content and the align items is the Y axis. If you change your container to a column, then they kind of like flip their sides. Then there is some other thing that I'm gonna paste. This is going to enable us to work with the flipping of the card, the one that was happening here, this thing. We have some more CSS classes down the line, and this is one of the needed things, to have the perspective parameter defined. Not gonna dive into that one because there is a lot of depth in that CSS and in those kind of like tricks. Now that we have that, let's maybe make it look a little bit nicer. We want also the headline to be, let's go back, want it to be aligned, center. We're gonna do header. You can do container, header. Let's change some stuff. So container, header, h2. What do we want from it? We want a margin, bottom, 0.2 rem, and then a font weight of 500. Then we have a similar thing for h3, but we're gonna have a margin top, font weight of 200, font size is going to be 1 rem. So we want to basically, usually h3 is a little bit bigger. We want to kind of like put it a little bit down, and the width is going to be 80%, just because. Also, the whole header needs to have some adjustment. Container, header. You could also do just header, really. It doesn't really matter, but since we already started container header, I usually look at what's above it and then continue it. Maybe that's also BS. Text align, center, and yeah, and since this is width like this, can you try margin 0 auto? Would that work? Yeah, that worked. Funny, because I actually had a flex situation happen in there. Oh well, not needed. I really rather use text align and margins and not put unnecessary display flex. I don't know why, I just feel that it's easier. Alrighty, now that we have the header, where should we go next? Let's start with just building up our input fields. So we go back to our index HTML. We're gonna add a div that is going to be our whole kind of elements of input fields. We're gonna have a lot of them. And per element, we're gonna have a div with a class of setting. We're going to make them sort of unified, at least when it comes to like widths and maybe some margins. So it's easier for us and we can style them as we want. Okay, so first is gonna be label. It's gonna be for data. It's gonna be text, text slash URL. And this label is going to have as well a span. So like the little text explanation that we have. What did it have? Wait, include text or a URL. Let's just copy that from here. So include text or a URL you want the QR code to lead to. As well, feel free to change that if you feel like you have a better description, or you can also just remove it as you prefer. And then the for attribute that we put in the label needs to be for a certain input field. So we can do input, type text, it already suggests, that's correct. And we're gonna name it data. Well, not name it, it's just the for and name. Is the for name one or for an ID? I always do both. I cannot. I think the for works with the ID together. The name, not sure what the name is for. Might be wrong. The minimum of the characters is going to be 1 and the maximum is going to be, let's see if we have a requirement. So I have a data parameter. So the minimal is 1 and the maximal char count 900. So ideally it should be as less as possible, because then sometimes it's harder for QR readers to read it as it gets complex, but it's up to 900. I mean, in general, I doubt it that somebody will have 900 characters to put there unless they, I don't know, put a poem. And let's close it. Cool. So now if we go to our thingy, it should have our text. Nice. Also, why is this QR code and this is QR code? Okay, we need to fix this R. It bothers me a little bit. Okay, we have a class called setting, which we're gonna repeat throughout every input kind of like row that we have. So let's do setting. What I wanted to have is a margin of 1 rem, basically throughout the whole, all the sides. Then a display flex and a flex direction of column. Let's refresh, and that's what it gives us. Nice. We also want to change the input field. We want to make it a little bit more sophisticated. So in order to change that, we can actually target it through the type. Input, type, text. because we're gonna have different types. I'm sorry, you probably don't see what I'm doing. Here you go. And this specific targeting is for our text field. This specific styling is for our text field. I want the border to be 1 pixel solid black, or let's do the hex parameter. Then I want the padding, which is inside. Basically, now there is no padding. You see the little cursor, not cursor. Yeah, it is a cursor, right? The little blinking thingy. It's kind of stuck to the borders. We want to give it a little bit some space, some air. So it's going to be 0.35 rem, then 0.85 rem, and then 0.35 rem and 0.4 rem. Don't ask me why. I think I probably got a little bit bored when I was writing all of that, so I tested things out. The line height, I want it to be a little bit bigger, so I want it to expand, and that's going to be 1.2 rem, and refresh. Now you see that it has a little bit more space. Font size, however, font size, we're going to keep at 1 rem. There you go. And what else is left? Font weight. I want to be 200. Border radius a little bit. Let's add 0.3 rem. Now, I will agree with you. 0.3 rem is a little bit ridiculous to define. Like, I could put probably 4 pixels instead, but I decided not to. But I agree that that's probably not the ideal thing. Then our font family is gonna be the work sans thingy. Because for some reason, you see, even though we defined on the body that our font should be default to this one, it didn't. So we need to redefine it for the input text. And now if we type something, we have that. Now another thing I want to add is I want to change the focus. I don't want to remove the focus, please. We've all been there. And if you have not been there, then good that you have not been there and don't get there. Removing outline of elements is it's a big no-no. There are so many people who are relying on this focusing tabs, not just for like simplicity, but for essential navigation within the website. Let's keep them there, okay? It just needs to be there. If you want to know more why, then you can read about accessibility maybe. It's a very, very, very broad topic, very neglected, but we're gonna try and do our best to get more proper habits, I would say, to make the internet accessible for everybody, because it was designed to be accessible for everybody, but we messed up. So type text and focus. What is this focus thingy? This is actually whenever you click on an input field, it's not just an input field, it's a different state, right? This outline suddenly is there, and it's there because it's focused. So the state of the input field is on focus. And you can see that sometimes in the elements here. So if we select it and you go to styles, you have here pseudo classes, they're called. And here you have active, focus. Those are called pseudo classes, and it can be like a hover effect, focus effect, active effect, focus. I said focus. You get the point. So what I want is I want to change the color of the border. I want the border to be 1 pixel solid and a yellowish color that you probably have seen our button had. We still didn't code the button in the example. So like this one. You see, this is the outline I want to have. And for that, first I need to do an outline none to remove the default one, because otherwise it's not going to override it. And there you go. Okay, next one. No, not next one. We need to still fix this thing. Okay, let's go and give our span a class of sub label. And then in here, we're going to do dot sub label, and the font size is going to be 0.9 rem. And the font weight is going to be 200. Yeah, okay. Does it look the same? A little bit, right? Why does it have this bigger padding? What did I miss? Did I forget the padding? Yes, I did. So padding is 0 again and 2 rem, 2. There we go. Now if we refresh it, there we go. Now it's nicer. So we're gonna continue to our two other cool input fields. And for that, we're going to again do div.setting, and it's gonna be two of them. Well, yeah, but first let's build one. And actually, because they're not going to be like a regular setting, there are two of them, so the styling is going to be a little bit different. And I wrapped it in another one, in another div called div colors. I say called as if that's the name of it, but the CSS class is colors. As always, first is label, and 4 is going to be color, which we're going to name main color. And I know it's very hard for me to also do color and not color. Input, of course, and type color. How cool is that? I didn't know that it has it, but I think it's pretty cool. ID is color because that's the 4 ID. The default value is gonna be black, so 000000. Then we also have a span where we want to display the color. So mind you, the input color is just this square. Everything else we added ourselves. The ID of this span is going to be color value. We need this ID in order to later on, once there is a change, so once the user clicks on a color, we're going to add some code in JavaScript that is going to listen to the change and is going to manually insert the value of the color that was selected into text into this span. Since we know that by default is black, then we're just going to write text 000000. Did I have too many zeros? 0000. There you go. Okay, let's go to our page and refresh it. Yeah, nice. Okay, now we can actually just copy down this lovely thing. We're just gonna do BG color. Type still color, because that's the default input type. Not the default, it's just an input type. BG color. And the value here, we can do what was there. CS7, CS7, CS7. Although usually it's gonna be white. But in order to see what's going on, let's just do that. 77. Here we're gonna have BG color value just to stay consistent, and there we go. Now let's go to the styling. We're gonna go to dot colors. First, what we want to do is, you guessed it, a display flex, and we want to have a justify content space around. Space around gives space around the elements, as opposed to space between. We just push them aside, like, yeah. So we're gonna keep space around just because it's nicer. Ooh, I didn't change this one. Wait. Let's go back to the index and background color. Boom. Very nice. Now we want to change the setting that is inside of the color, but only the setting that is inside of the, not the color, the colors class. We don't want to change the ones that are here or the future ones that are gonna go below them. So we're gonna do .colors.setting. This way we know that we're targeting specifically those ones. So we're gonna do align items center and text align center. We're able to do align items center because our setting has already display flex. So we're extending the functionality that is already defined in the setting by saying align our items in the center, which is also a property that works only with display flex, because we have colors dot setting. So the dot setting already has this characteristics or attributes, styling settings, call them however you want. So you see now it kind of like got nicer. Then I want to tackle the span. So the value of the color, I want to make it a little bit smaller. Colors.setting again, and then span. So font size, I want 0.9 rem, and font weight at 200. Isn't that the same as our sublabel? Yeah, it is. So maybe we can even remove that, save it, and put a sublabel on this thing. Yeah, there you go. Okay, now to the fun part, to change this color boxes. So we're gonna, again, target input, type, but this time it's gonna be color. And what we're gonna need to do is we basically need to make the default appearance as a none and then kind of work with it. So follow along. I'm gonna copy paste some of the appearances thing because I'm too lazy to type. We're basically targeting the appearances and in different browsers where sometimes it's not supported, so you need to have these prefixes. Then the background is going to be none. Everything is none. Then I do want to add some border, and it's going to be surprise surprise 1 pixel, solid and black. There you go. Even auto-completes already. The height of it is going to be 50 pixels, the width as well. But we're also going to give it some padding, so we have like the space between the border and the color itself that fills inside. So padding is 0.2 rem. Again, I know, ridiculous. I agree. No problem. You can use pixels. I'm not going to judge you. I understand. What's missing is a cursor, like a pointer. Like this one, you see? Now I'm gonna add a little bit of more things that are specific per browsers. Just copy paste those if you want from the finished result that is on GitHub, if you don't want to type those, or just like stop the video and type them. These are basically tackling different behaviors of browsers. I found it on CodePen and copy that as well. So now you see our squares are a little bit bigger because it kind of resets some very nitty gritty thingy. Now that we have this, I want to again change the outline to another color. So we're going to do that. And as we did before, it's going to be input type color and focus, as you remember from the text type. Outline is reset. And we add on top border. This time it's going to be 2 pixels. And I also want to add a border radius. Should we go with pixels this time? Let's go with pixels. Not a border, border radius. I get too excited. Do you even see my border radius? Because I don't. Did I save it? Yes, I did. Oh wait, no, that's on focus. Here. Now it works. Now that we have these ones, let's do this, the size, the margin and the format, and then we can go to the JavaScript part. You know the drill. We're going to create a setting. Well, I wanted to copy, but it's actually going to be different. So div.setting. The only thing that is the same is the div.setting, so we can type that. And also, if you're wondering how I type div.setting and then it creates this thing, I just press on tab, and there's a thing called Emmet. Visual Studio Code has it already integrated. It's kind of like autocomplete things. It's amazing. We go with label for size, and we're gonna name it size as well. Then we're gonna have a span sub label, and it's gonna be by default 200 by 200. And then we're gonna have an input of a range here. Name is size, and ID is also size. Input type range needs to have a value, a minimum value, a maximum value, and a step. So a step is basically this like little movements. Let's say you're choosing a tip that you can tip between 5 euros and 20 euros. And you can tip only with increments of 5. So you can tip 5, 10, 15, or 20. So your step is going to be 5, meaning that it jumps every 5. The values available are 5, 10, 15, 20. And the min is 5, the max is 20, and then you also define a default value. Same with us. Let's go though to the docs and check what's the minimum size. So the minimum is 10 and the maximum is 1000. The default is 200. Okay, so for simplicity's sake, I don't think anybody's gonna be wanting like a 10 value, or at least I decided that my users don't want it. My minimum is going to be 100. My maximum is going to be 1000. That's fine. The value is going to be 200, and I do want to kind of restrict the step of 100. So even though here a valid example is 50 and 750, so it means that most likely your value, so your step can be 50, because from 200 you can jump to 250, 300, and also go lower to actually not even 50. No, yeah, 50. But also 10 is the lowest. Anyway, there is too much math there going on, and I didn't feel like figuring these things out. And there's a lot of pain that comes with input type range. So just take my word for it. We're gonna keep it simple, and we're just gonna do a min of 100, a max of 1000, a value of 200, and a step of 100. I think we can agree on that. I'll consider that you have agreed. Let's style it a little bit. So we go to our style. Input type, you guessed it, range. So as always, or not really always, but we have a thing that we need to kind of reset the appearance of the regular one. And then we define the width is going to be 100%. The height of it is going to be 5 pixels. Look at that, who's using pixels. No, but really in type range, you should use pixels. You should not use REMs. Take it from a person who worked a lot with ranges, and for even Internet Explorer. Let's not talk about the dark days. Then the background, just background, is going to be D9, D9, D9. And the background is going to be this little thing here. You see? Then outline is going to be none, but we're going to fix that. Don't worry. Also padding 0 and margin 0. Then this thing, this little thing, it's a separate thing to design, and it's called WebKit Slider Thumb. Let me copy that so I don't make any mistake. Those double columns, if I'm not mistaken, that's just like accessing hidden elements within that thing. Because if you go to the input, like if you go here, you don't see those things. I think in Firefox you might see that, but I'm using like a Chromium based browser. I'm using Brave, and also Chrome doesn't have this functionality. Maybe Safari has, but anyway, you just need to know that this thing is called slider thumb. We're going again to add the appearance of none because we want to reset it. And then we're going to change the width of it. It's going to be 20 pixels, as well as the height. And if we save that, it has disappeared. Okay. Border radius is going to be 50% because we want to have it like round. And the background is going to be FDC 886. And it appeared again. Nice. So cursor is going to be a pointer because we need to this little thingy. And then we are adding a little bit of a transition. So we're gonna add that on hover, the thumb has a different color, and that's gonna be the one, I think this one, the main color that we always have. So background is going to be this, but here let's add the hover state. You see, now it's changed. Nice. And we're gonna do the same for active. Honestly, I don't have a lot of explanation for this part because usually, so I did that once, and I since then am just copy pasting things that I have figured out once. Honestly, this is like so specific that I didn't go any more deeper into that. And I also, like, I feel that there are better resources than me to explain all of this little details. So just follow along. I think that's just expanding our knowledge and exposure to what the chaining of CSS classes and styles can look like, and which like pseudo classes and states are out there. The same thing that we did for WebKit, we're going to do for Mozilla because it needs a special attention. If you also want not to type it like me, not to type it, just like I did not type it right now, then just check the GitHub repository in the description box below. And there is a folder called finished result. Go to the styles.css and you can just copy whatever has input type range and paste it. Oh, also another one. Wait, last one. A range track and then like inner and outer thing. So just so you know, it's just very tedious, I know. But that's not the most boring part. We're done with the boring part, I promise. Yeah, so here you see now that when we click on it and when it has like a hover state, not a hover, yeah, a focus. So I was trying that with the tab, it's also there. So we're good. Now that we have this range, we can copy paste it. So take this and paste it right below. And here we can actually add our margin, right? Because we have a margin here. And this one is going to be 1 pixel. So we forgot the span tag because we're again going to change that with JavaScript later on. So this is going to be size value, and this span is going to be margin value. Kind of wish I didn't copy it down, honestly, because I'm afraid I'm gonna miss something and then something's not gonna work. Okay, so the minimum is, I think it's gonna be 1. Let's go. By the way, our margin is not the doc's margin, because there is here margin. We're actually not using that one. We're using the Q zone. Why? Because I just played around with it. You can also do that and it just looked nicer. So the minimum value is 0, which is fine. The step is probably also 1. And the value, the current one, that is 1, and the maximum value is 100. I think that's fair enough. This one, let's refresh. There you go. Okay, it does a little bother me. So let's get into this. So this one, I guess I'll need to add, where is our input type range? Here we have a 0. I don't know, let's just add some margin to it. 0.5 REM and 0. So like only top and bottom. On the side it can stay the same. Yeah, that works. Okay, cool. Now let's add the last one before we go to JavaScript, which is our formats. It's this one, image format. So image format is going to be a little bit special. Well, actually, as anything we did here, we're going to have a thing called fieldset. That's basically when you have radio buttons, because what we're going to use is radio buttons because we want to have a selection and then have the user choose only one. So in order for HTML to understand that they are part of the same group, you need to put them in a field set. So legend, going to be image, format, each input is going to be wrapped in a div for styling purposes. I'm going to be input type radio. There you go. Name is going to be format, and we're going to keep it consistent for all of them. ID is going to be, for example, PNG. Value, also PNG. It's going to be checked by default. ID is going to be also format, sorry. And of course, let's not forget our label for PNG. And this is going to be PNG. Is it wrong that it's for PNG? Wait, let me try with another one. I'm a little bit confused. So let's try the next one and do it for GIF. GIF and GIF. So PNG. The purpose of the label is that if you even click on the things, like you see, if you click on the labels, it should also already select where the input is needed. So if I click on main color, background color, text URL, you see it's already boom, boom. So if I click on GIF, it doesn't. And I think that we have cracked our mystery of what the for is for the ID or for the name. I think it's for the ID. So if we do GIF, let's try. Refresh it, and if I click on PNG or GIF, you see, I don't need to go and straight away click on these ones. I can also click on these ones. Alrighty, what else do we have? We have PNG, GIF. Let's go and check here. PNG, GIF, JPEG, JPG, and SVG. GIF. It's first going to be JPEG. Whoops. JPEG. And this is going to be capitalized. We could also do that through CSS, but we don't like easy roads. JPEG. The way how I'm selecting multiple things is by selecting a word and then do Command D. It's going to select all the ADI, and then you can like code, and it selects and puts the cursor there so you can change it. Super helpful, really. We're going to add SVG. Yeah, cool. Now we need to style it a little bit because it looks a little bit off from our designs. So let's go to the style. Okay, so you know it. Input, type, radio. What is it gonna have? It's gonna have again the non-appearance thingy because that's just how we roll. Then we're gonna have a display of inline block because we want them all to be kind of together, but still have a block element to them. The width is going to be 15 pixels and the height as well. Add a little bit of padding. 2 pixels. I know, shocking. There is another thing called background clip, and we can select content box. And then we do border, 1 pixel solid, and the color is FDC 886. Yeah, and the background color is going to be white. There is the white one. Oh yes, and let's not forget border radius of 50% because we want it to be round. So look how cute that is, isn't it? Nice. Now let's handle a checked state. So did we add that one to our index.html? Oh, we added that all of them are checked. That's wrong. My bad. See, that's what happens with copy pasting. Only one of them can be checked. Didn't help us because we still didn't handle the state when it's checked. Since we did the WebKit appearance none, we kind of removed the default stuff. So we need to redefine them. Okay, so when it's checked, the background color, which is again the first one here, is going to be an FDC again. And here, let's not forget the checked. So if we refresh, you see, now it has the checked. Boom! How cute is that? Okay, let's also add a focus because right now, if we go and we go with focus, then it's blue. We want to change that a little bit. So can copy that down because the values are kind of the same. Just change this to focus DA764. And we also want a border. It's going to be 2 pixels solid. And also DA764. Set the outline to none. So you see here you have the outline because if I go out or if I go in, it's different. Cool. Now let's change the field set design a little bit. Field set. Have a display flex and a flex wrap. Because if you see here, this SVG went kind of like to the second line because there is not enough space. And that's enabled with flex wrap. Then border is going to be none because we don't want that border. Thank you. Padding 0. And margin 0 as well. Last but not least, justify content. Space between. Oh, too fast. There you go. Okay, now the legend. Let's give it a little bit of a margin down. Field set legend. Margin bottom is going to be 0.5 rem. And also, if you're wondering how it kind of like auto-completes when I write MB, it's again emmet. I just write margin bottom and press tab and it knows it. That's how I also did the display flex. Boom, done. All right, you're still here? Cool. Let's design the little divs that are there. So it's field set and div. Because in our case, we have only one div per option of a format. So it's okay to do that. I mean, in general, if you have like a big code base, you would do classes everywhere because otherwise you can just override a lot. But since we're isolated to our little project and we're in charge and we know what's happening and it's only one page, we can safely proceed with this tactic. Border, 1 pixel solid, black, like this. Border radius, we're gonna have a tiny 0.3 rem. Why do I say border radius and I don't type the radius? Because it ends with R and I think that it's already typed. Display flex, because we want, I don't know if you can see it, but the little circle and the PNG, for example, they're not aligned really. They're like the circle is higher and the PNG is lower. So what I want to do is I want to display flex and align items center. And well, that actually added more things, but yeah, it changed things. try it out in your code. Then I want some padding. What is padding I want? 0.25 rem and 0.5 rem. So top and bottom is smaller, sides left and right are bigger because it needs some air. Then we're gonna add some margin right, because only on the right side we want a margin, and 0.25 rem. I mean, you can also add margin left, but hold on. And margin bottom is going to be 0.5 rem. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So now the only thing is that if this grows bigger and we select this, you see that this last item also has a margin. So you see the blue kind of thingy in here, it's on the border, and for the SVG it's not, because we have the margin right. So what we can do, field set div last child, which means, hey, I want to say hey Siri, no, hey browser, wherever I have a field set and the div is the last child, it's like the last one in the tree, I don't want it to have a margin. So margin right should be 0. And if we refresh now, it has moved a little bit. So you see, now it's perfectly aligned with the border of the setting. We want to change a little bit the input. We want to give some space between the dot and the format text. So we're going to do field set div input. See, you can chain as many things as you want. In this case, it means, hey, field set, do you have a div inside and do you have an input inside? Change something there. Margin right is going to be 0.5 rem, because why not? And we're also going to add a cursor of a pointer because it's cute. This one. However, we also need this cursor action on the label. We don't need the margin. Save it, refresh, and there we go. Cool. Let's check it against this one. Looks quite similar, doesn't it? Has a little bit of a difference, but maybe it's gonna come with the rest. There are some styling still to come when we flip the card, so we'll come back to it. Last but definitely not least is our button, which is going to sort of submit our request. And where does it end? So we have the div setting here, and then here we add another div with a class of CTA. CTA means call to action, if you don't know, and that's a pretty common way to describe, at least in corporate life, buttons, because you always want people to click on them. So button is going to be of a type submit. How can I, well, I don't really, the emot abbreviation is a little bit killing it here. There you go, submit, there you go. And the ID of CTA. Well, I usually like to put the IDs as early as possible, so it's more readable and easier to find. And we're gonna have a generate QR code. Save it. Boom. Yeah, that's how buttons look like by default. Where do we go? We go to our style, and we need to change a lot of the button situation. So button. First and foremost, background color. It's going to be this one. Then it's going to have a padding. 0.5 rem and 1.2 rem. Font size is also going bigger, 1.1 rem. And the font family has also not been applied. So let's copy this one. There we go. Let's see what are the changes so far. Pretty good, pretty good. Font weight, surprise, this time I'm going to use 500. We have this font weight, so we're good to use it. Border radius 0.3 rem. I continue with the nonsense, I know. Margin is 0.5 rem. Then it's auto. and then it's 1.5 rem. So what it does, it gives the top and the bottom, it defines it, and auto usually means center it. Kind of like take whatever there is left, put the, like take it, divide it into two, and that's where you put the element, and the rest is kind of like, that's how I think about it. I don't know if that's the calculation that goes through the browser's mind, but yeah, let's pretend that that is. Then we have border that is 2 pixels, solid, FDC 886, yes. Line height 1.1 rem to match the font size, because if it doesn't match the font size, then chances are that it's like a little bit or higher or lower. So the line height defines, no, it doesn't define. It basically usually aligns with the font size, but if it doesn't, then if you're in an element like a button, if your line height is like half of it, then the text looks a little bit out of place. So in order to fix that, you don't need to align anything. You can just put the line height to be aligned with your font size. Something I learned from one of my ex-bosses. As usual, cursor, I don't know, hard word. Pointer, and I also add a tiny little bit of transition because why not? So I also want to do a button hover, because what is a button without a hover state? So we're going to paste the transition there as well, and we're going to define what we want to transition. So what's happening on it? We want to transform all, no, sorry. Transform, we want to translate y minus 0.2 rem. So this is going to be like bloop, 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 bloop. It's pretty cute, I think. Refresh, boom, 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 boom. And we also have a button active state. Let's not forget about that. Transition stays, and then background color is going to be a little bit more intense, as well as the border. So border is going to be still 2 pixels, but just the color changes. So refresh, and now, and the active, that's the active. Now we also have a focus one, which is going to be, we're just going to change the outline to none. We have a border. So focus and transition we don't need here, I think. Let's see. So you see, once it's unselected, it's not really unselected. We're just not there. Yeah. Okay. So we can remove this. Whoops. This one. So now we need to a little bit like align it, right? Oh, also another one, we are gonna have a button disabled state, because by default we cannot send a request without the text. So by default our button is disabled, but we're gonna add some JavaScript functionality. I just want to put here the state of the disabled as well, and maybe change it in the index HTML. So here, disabled. There you go. See, so now nothing can happen. All right, we need to have it centered. Why is it not centered? Because here it is, and here it isn't. So why did the auto didn't kick in? I think I need to define the .cta and display flex. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Awesome. How do you like our little app? Very nice, isn't it? Now we're gonna start with JavaScript. Let's go to our script.js. All right, so we have here our console log. What we're gonna be doing, our task is to gather data, whatever the user selects, gather it in a way that the API needs, and then send it to them, and then see if we get back an okay or not, and later on do something with that data. So in order to gather the data, we need to start extracting elements from the page. We do that by having basically a lookup, I think it's called. I think that's the correct term. A document lookup. Let's call it like that. As a start, let me show you how to get our text data. We can do const data input, equals document dot query selector. I like to use query selector. And the hashtag is going to be what we have defined in our data. So the ID is data. In data. So now if we do data input dot value and we console log it, dot log, we open the inspect, and let's put value of la. We save it, we save the script, we go to our console and we refresh it and we see la la la, because that's the value that we have here. It might be a little bit confusing right now, but basically what I wanted to show you is that we can access from JavaScript our data input field that we have there by just doing document.querySelector with and target the selector that we want. This is our text. There is nothing more that we need to do with the text for now. So we can continue and we can go and take our color values. So these ones, right? Because first we have the text and then we have these ones. So let's put here the colors and const main color is going to be document again dot query selector. And I think it was, so don't forget the quotes. Was it main color? And then you can just copy that down and use background color, and here have BG color. Let's check if that's correct. So we also, let's remove the value of the la la la, we don't need that. And here we have ID color and BG color. We can even remove the main color, that was wrong. So the text we got in order to extract it later for our API, to send it to the API, because we need that information. The main color, not only the main, also the background color, we don't need them only to get the information and send it to the API. We also need to know when the user selected, let's say red, so it's 255.00 or FF0000. Once the user is out of that, we want this to be updated. And that's what we're gonna do now. In order to know when the user have changed something, there is a thing called event listeners. I have left some useful resources to read if you want to dig a little bit more into inputs, colors, other things that we're gonna cover in the JavaScript part on the website of the challenge. So it's the ultimateapichallenge.com/APIs, I think, /QR code generator API. Basically go to the ultimateapichallenge.com and you're going to find there all the information you need. There is a ton of information there. So give that a look, and we're going to add an event listener. So it's going to be a function, because I like to isolate everything to functions and then you call the functions. You could probably also just like paste the event listeners here, but let's kind of like create good practice. So const add color picker event listeners. Arrow function, and here we're going to do main color. Well, actually, let's call it main color picker and background color picker, because we're also going to have the values, not just the pickers. So let's put it like that. Main color picker dot add event listener, and we're going to listen to an on change event. So you see it even says here what we're doing on change, and when the on change event is getting fired, we're going to call a function update color, which we still don't have. We're going to create it. Same goes for our background color picker. Background color picker on change, we're going to do update background color. Save it, and of course, if that's going to be reloaded, we're probably going to have some errors. No, we don't, because there is a thing I always forget to do. We need to call this function in order to add the event listeners. So now, if that's going to be updated automatically, then it's going to have an error, I think. Let's create those functions. Const update color. An advantage of using event listeners is that how are we going to extract the value of whatever was changed? The event listener is actually given us the event, and within the event, we can find the value that we need. In our case, it's going to be const value equals e, so event, you can name it as you want, dot target dot value. And yeah, you see now we have an error because we don't have an update background color. So if we console log value, I do it in curly brackets so you'll see how the console log looks like. If we do it like this and I change it and go out, you see it says value and now it's this value. I did it in curly brackets because if I don't do the console log in curly brackets, then let me show you, it's going to be just the value. And sometimes if you have many console logs, then it's easier to do it like that. Anyway, oh, also, if you fancy the deconstruction, you can also wrap the value const in curly brackets and remove the value from here. This is object deconstruction from ES6. If that's too advanced for you, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to do that. And I'm gonna actually revert it to this because we're focusing on that, but just as a side note. Now we have the value and we want to update that little hash 0000. So we actually need to also look up the labels. So main color value equals document dot query selector, and what was it? Color value, and this one BG color value. Cool. Color value, and then BG color value, and this is background color value. We have those elements. Now we can add here main color value. I'll explain it in just a sec. just follow me. Just follow. Dot inner text equals value. Okay, I'll comment this font for a sec so it's not gonna give us any errors. Okay, what do we have here? Let's focus on only the main color picker. Whenever this file JavaScript loads, it creates the functions, but it doesn't call them. The functions are being called only like that, right? So we, at the bottom of the page, we call a function that was defined above because JavaScript goes top to bottom. So add color picker event listeners. We call that function and we say, hey, get the main color picker, which you can find under this hashtag color, and add an event listener to it that is gonna get fired every time there is a change event, and call the function update color. So whenever the user is doing this, not just this, but actually this, then call our update color function. You could also do it when the user is doing this, but also it's kind of like closed, right? You don't see it, so why bother? You don't want to fire too many events also in the browser. You can just like overload it. Call the update color, and the event listener gives us the event. And within the event, we can find event.target.value. This is event.target.value. Remember it for the rest of your life. This is, you're gonna use it all over the places, regardless of the framework you're using. We store it in a const called value, and then we say, hey, get our main color value, so our little span, and take the inner text of it. That's just like something that HTML gives us, or JavaScript gives us. Who gives us? The DOM basically has that, and we accessing it, and put our value inside of it. We could also do it for simplicity's sake, like this. That's gonna be also exactly the same. You can do it as you want. I decided to do it like that, and I'll keep it like that. So I think you probably saw when I was already demoing it that if I do it like this, and we see here that it's E7 4B B4B, there you go, E7 4B 4B. Cool. Now we need to repeat the same thing for the background color picker. Now, if you're feeling adventurous or if you're feeling secure enough in whatever we just did and with the explanation and everything, pause the video, do the thing for the background color picker, and then continue. Seriously, you can do this. Pause it. Okay. If you didn't pause, let's continue. Or if you did pause and you managed it, high five. Now, we're going to create const update background color, again, it's gonna get one argument as e, which is the event. And we're going to do const value equals e.target.value. Emit, don't do those things here. And then we're going to do background color value, dot inner text equals a value. There we go. So now if we change this to red and this to blue, boom, boom. Cool, we have our color pickers working. Let's continue to our size and margin. So these are kind of like the sections. We're gonna have a couple more of sections like that. So let's continue. Sliders, let's call them. Usually I would put all the variables on the very top and then the functions towards the bottom, just for like separation things. But it's okay for this thing to do it like that. As long as you don't use whatever you have defined below, if you don't do it above, that's fine. Because as I mentioned, JavaScript goes from top to bottom. And if in the top you're using a variable that it was still not created because you put it down, then that's not gonna happen. Okay, so sliders. Const size slider and const margin slider calls document query selector, and it's gonna be what size, right? Equals margin, and the same goes for the values, right? So size value and margin value, and here size value and margin value. Let's save it and double check. So size value and size, margin and margin value. All right, we can continue. So the drill is the same. We're gonna create first event listeners. So const add slider event listeners equals to a function, and we take size slider dot add event listener, and the event we're going to listen to is a change event as well. So they have that in common with the color picker, at least the ones that we chose. And we're going to call and update size. Same goes for margin slider margin update margin, and don't forget to call the add slider event listeners, because I always do. If you have seen previous challenges that I have done, I always forget to actually call the add event listeners function, always. All right, const update size is going to as well take an event because we want to know what's the new value of it. And let's just copy down update margin just so we have it. We're again do const value equals e.target.value. Also can copy it down here. You see there is like a repetitive pattern. Pretty sure that you could unite it into one function and make it super non-repetitive. But when you're learning, repetition is actually pretty good. So we're gonna stick with that. So e.target.value. And it also, I feel like, especially when you're a beginner, the more code you write, the more it's like, oh, I did something. So we have our value. However, our size value is not just going to be inner text. Inner text equals value. No, because as you can see, our size has a special format. It has a value times value, and that's what we're going to provide. You could do it two ways, or probably more ways, but you can do it value plus x plus value. This would work, but I would prefer to use a thing called backticks, string interpolation, which I found very handy. Basically what it does, it's a string, but if you want to write JavaScript inside of your string, so our value is a variable, thus we need to use JavaScript, you can just use curly brackets and a dollar that, prepends it, and write value. And you see the syntax. So if I write value here, it's just a string. But if I put the value inside of it, then you can see that it's like a JavaScript syntax. Now we could go to our margin and do as well. Margin of value dot inner text equals, in our case, it has the value and the word pixel or px. So we can do the same thing. We do value and then pixel. If we refresh the page, change that, and release, it should update. Look at that. And now margin. Boom. Who did that? You did that. Good job. Now the one remaining element that we have is the image format. And that one is quite simple to get. And that's why I would even put it on the top next to the data, next to the text. Let's call it image format. Because this one, we don't need to display anything to the user because it's just like the functionality is working by itself. The user sees what they select, but we do need the information once it's selected, once we send the API request. Let me show you how we do it. So we const image format equals document dot query selector. And in here, we're going to use input, name, format, and we're going to take the one that has a checked value. So if we go here, this input, it has checked, right? That's why it's selected. And we're basically telling JavaScript, hey, JavaScript, go to our page and find us an input with the name format. That's why all of them, they have a name format. Name format, and find the one that has a state of checked. And this is how easy peasy we can get the image format that is currently checked. Cool, isn't it? Now comes the very fun part. Let's, on a click of a button, console log all the data we have, like all of it. In order for that to happen, we need to get our button first. So submit button equals document.query selector. Hashtag CTA, right? I think I did. I call it hashtag. I don't even know if that's the right thingy, but yeah, ID CTA. Cool. And of course, we need to add an event listener. Const add submit event listener. So submit button dot add. And the event that we're going to be listening to is a submit. No, sorry, it's a click. And we're going to call on submit function. And don't forget to call the add submit event listener. Just one. Yeah. And call it. Now we need to create an on submit function, which is going to take nothing. Because we actually don't need anything from the button. So in here, let's console log clicked, right? We have it disabled, so we cannot click on it. However, let's remove the disabled for now, save it, refresh, and now if we click on it, we have clicked. Cool. Now let's, as we said, console log all of the data that we have. So if the user changes it, we still want to get the latest data of everything. And since we have already looked up all the elements, it's going to be pretty simple for us to get it up to date. Like we don't even need to update anything. We just, once there is a click on the submit, we're going to get again all the values. Let's check. So const data. We're going to call it data because the API expects it to be data. The data parameter. That's our text URL thing. Data input dot value. And then we can do the same with color, main color, picker value. And then this is going to be BG color and background color pickle value. Yeah, it's a tongue twister. Then we also have a size, const size equals size slider dot value. And then also we have a const. Here it is. It's not a margin. It's a Q zone. I'm going to have margin slider dot value. If you missed why it's a Q zone, if we check is the same why we have our text data, this is, we decided to use Q zone. But if you give the user like, hey, Q zone, these are going to be like, what? But if you put it as margin, then it's more descriptive. So we just did a workaround. And of course, our format, which is image format.value. And now we can all console log all of these ones. So I'm not going to type all of them because I'm lazy. Just going to copy it. Boom. There we go. So refresh the page just to get the latest. Let's change it fast before it refreshes and say la 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 la. And let's say red and generate QR code. Boom. We have la 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 la, one color, another color, 747 and PNG. Cool. So before we call the API, the values that we have here, so for example 700, that's not really what the API expects. Because if we go to the size, it has explicitly told us that the format needs to be integer x integer. And we so far have just like integer. So before we do something, we actually need to call a function. Let's call it prepare parameters. And we're going to create it here. And it's going to be const prepare parameters. And it's going to accept params. I'm calling it parameters because it's going to be our URL parameters. And that's kind of like as explicit as it gets. So we are going to create an object here. So that's not the final syntax, but stay with me. We're going to create an object and we're going to go to the API and check one by one. So we have our data. Data needs to come just as is. Encode it in PHP because in JavaScript, so I think I tried and with encoded and without encoded, it went just fine. So we're just going to keep it like that. Data is going to be params.data. Here we are preparing an object to be sent to our API. So this is the exact thing that is going to be sent to the API. So we need to pay attention what the docs are asking us to do. Size, we're going to use again our string interpolation, and it's going to be params.size times params.size, because this is what it tells us here, integer times integer. Why does it have this? Yeah, it's because, okay, I'll spoil the end of it. We need to have a return here. Next parameter is, not this one, color. Color is going to be params.color. However, if you have seen, then our color is actually being sent with the hashtag, and we don't need that. That's the examples here. None of them have a hashtag. We need to replace the hashtag, and that's pretty simple. We just do replace. So it basically, replace is a method on strings in JavaScript, and this is a string because it's like hashtag 0000, and we say, hey, replace, and first you need to define what to replace, so it's our hashtag, and then you do a comma, and you need to tell replace it with what? With nothing, with an empty string. Same goes for the background color, which is called BG color. No camel case, just BG color. But our param is actually camel cased. So remember that. Don't forget your commas. Then what we have next, I think that's the margin, but we don't do the margin, we do the Q zone. Q zone. And the format is just an integer. And here you can see that. I'm going to do params dot Q zone, camel cased in our param, and format, right? Format and possible values. Okay, cool. So format is params dot format. Nice. So now that we put here a return, it means that basically we want this function only to do this and then spit back whatever it created. So where is it gonna spit it back to? It's gonna have it here. And that's why we need to do const parameters equals. So now whenever we call this function, we send all this data. Well, actually I sent it wrong because you see I put here params and I need to wrap all of this in an object because we're doing params.data, and I was sending data, comma, color. So I was sending 7 arguments, but if I wrap it in curly brackets, I'm sending only 1 argument, which is seen as params, and then params.data. So sorry if you were kind of like looking at me weird. I get it. Whenever we call this function and we pass this argument of params, it does this thing and then it spits it back because we say return it to us, and it's gonna return it and then store it in a variable called parameters. You could also omit this return and remove this curly bracket. You can put just a regular parentheses, and that's the equivalent of opening curly brackets, writing return, and doing that. But again, I showed you, you do as you prefer. I'm gonna keep it like that. Now that we have our parameters, we can actually call the API. So let's go for it. Let's create a get QR code and pass our parameters. And we're gonna create the QR code function here above, and we can also call it parameters. I'm trying to call the arguments differently so you would understand that you don't need to name them the same. For example, when they're here or here, they just need to be the same within the function, okay? The same called, I mean, the same name, the same like variable that the variable that represents them needs to be the same within the scope of the function. So this cannot be here parameters and this params. This params is this params. But once it lands here, it's parameters. So how we're going to call our API, there is a thing called a GET request. I included a resource to read in the ultimateapIchallenge.com on the API Challenges project page, where you can read about ways to call APIs and which methods there are out there. We're going to use a GET request, which basically says, hey, get me something. It's also the same thing as the browser does. So if you go here and you click on enter, the browser does a GET request to a remote server where it's being served this type of answer, and the browser then shows it to us. Also important to note that this API also accepts a post request. I saw it somewhere. Anyway, regardless, it accepts posts and GET. Post is most of the time when you send data and you want to submit it to a database maybe, or to update an entry of something, and that's mostly when you use post. But for us, since we're just going to be submitted an URL, we're not sending necessarily any data. I know it might look like we are sending the data, but not within like the understanding of the browser and the fetch API and everything. That's just like a note why we're using GET, and if you have seen that people are using post instead and we're not. So just so you know, maybe it's gonna be more clear later on because you'll see what we're using it for. Okay, so we need to go to fetch, not to go to fetch. We need to define fetch, write fetch. And fetch is basically a way to communicate with APIs. And if we go to the MDN documentation, there we go. Why is that in German? So fetch API, using the fetch API, basically what you're doing, you're defining your URL, and then when you have a response, you can console log it. Our URL needs to take all, let's open the API. So our URL needs to look something like this. Remember in the beginning I told you that there is a base URL, then there is like a route, and then there are params. So our params need to eventually look like question mark, data equals la 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 la, this ampersand, is that like the end thingy, size equals 200 times 200, and so on and so forth. Let's maybe hold on with the fetch. Our fetch will call a URL that needs to consist of const base URL and const URL params. Our base URL is this part. We can just copy it and make it equal to a string. You need to store it in a string because otherwise JavaScript is gonna go nuts. Now, our URL params, we know that they are in this format right now. Of course, we could write a function that is gonna take the key. A key is, for example, this, and then add an equal and put the value, and then add an end, and this, and this, and that. And then in the very beginning, add a question mark, and so on and so forth. But we're not going to do that. We're going to use something that is called URL search params, I think. So let's console log. The syntax for URL search params, let me just show you here. URL search params, there you go. Here's the examples. You write new URL, you pass something. Let me just show you, because I know how it's going to look like. So new URL search params, and here we're going to pass parameters and save it. So let's also see if the whole chain actually works, because we coded quite a lot and we didn't check anything. So, okay. URL search params are an empty object. We need to convert them to a string, because new means that it's kind of like a constructor thingy with objects and things. No need to dig into that. Just know that you need to convert them to a string. Okay, saved. And look at that. We got everything perfect. How's this TikTok thing? Perfect, 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 perfect. So data is empty. That's our mistake, because remember we have our disabled button, which is not disabled anymore. So we need to fix that. But the color, background color, Q zone and format, everything is there. Very, very nice. And now we can actually not equal that. So store that in const URL params equals this. Don't forget to remove the last parenthesis there. And now we can actually fetch it. So we need to define, let me make it a little bigger because we do again this kind of like string interpolation, because now we need to connect our base URL with our URL params. So base URL, and then we need to add the question mark, right? Because after a base URL, you have a question mark and then the params start. Because the new URL params, it doesn't add us the question mark, it just adds the params themselves. So that's what we're gonna do. URL params. Let's just save it. If we want to see what's happening, we can open the network tab. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Scroll to the bottom, refresh, remove, and click. So there you see, that's our request. I'm gonna click on preserve log, because then when it refreshes, we're still gonna keep this thing that is happening here. So what do we see? We see that we have a request to the base URL question mark with our URL params. Let's maybe also try to change the values and see if they are changed. And a big margin. Generate. At the bottom, you scroll down. Yes. Da, 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 da. So we have size 700 by 700, color, background color, Q zone, and format. The only thing we don't have is a response preview or stuff, because we got a status of 400. Why? Because we don't have our text URL. If we add now the text URL and we generate the code, we click on it, the status is 200. Are you ready for that? Look what we got. We got our little QR code. How cute is that? Nice. So now our one mission is to make that the text URL is required, and 2 would be to actually check the status code. What should we do first? Let's maybe first kind of like proof our UI to not send bad requests. The way how we're gonna do it is by going to whenever we click on submit. So we have our submit button, we have an event listener on submit, we go to the on submit function, and what is happening here is the data. We can check if data.length, you can do or equals 0, or you can just do if it doesn't exist, exclamation mark. This means if there is no data length, then we want to, let's say, call a function that is going to show an error. Show input error. It's not enough to only show an input error. We need to abort everything that goes after that. So we need to stop everything that we cannot send a request if we don't have the data. So we need to do a return. So now let's define what we're going to have in this show input error. Let's do it above the prepare parameters. So const show input error equals, let's add a class to this input called error. So data input dot class list dot add error, right? And the styles, we will need to do input dot error, and it's going to be border of 2 pixels solid DE8064. I know that because I did it here, so it's not that I just have a hex code in my head. No. Now that we have the input error, so if we click on it, now it is there. We also want to remove it, error, once we do have something in it, right? So we need to have kind of like a user feedback going on. And for that, we're going to extend our, do we have a data input for change? The input, we didn't add an event listener, right, for it. Okay, then we are gonna add it now. So let's create it here. Const data input event listener add, right? Let's not forget to call it straight under it. And in here, we're gonna do data input dot add event listener on change. So usually we would call a function outside, but let me show you also how else you can do that. You can define an arrow function inside of here, and you can also write it just in that. So as something for a change. We still need to have the E, so the event that's going to pass to us, just as it has been passed to, for example, update size. This E here is the same E as here, right? But from different element. So if e.target.value does not equal an empty string, right? So it's not empty, because by default it is an empty string. Then we need to do data input or data input dot class list dot remove error. So this way we say, okay, whenever there is a change within like the typing thingy, if the user was not removing the text, so it means that it has a value, then remove the error. Let's test it out. So right now, if we do this, by the way, wait, first let's check. If we refresh the page, we don't have anything in the input. We click on this one, we don't have any request because we blocked it. Remember? We said if data.length, if there is none, then return and show the input error, which is what is happening. It shows us the input error. Now, once we're putting some information here, the input error is removed. However, if I'm going to remove everything now and I'm going to go out because I'm a smartass, that should have kicked in, but it didn't. Oh, you know what we need to do? We need to do else. So if it's not there, if it is empty, then we need to add, because right now we're adding the class only on a click of a button, but we also want to add it in case it was removed. So now if there's this, it's okay. There's this, it's red. Nice. Good, a little hiccup there, but it's working now. It's all good. We also used to have, since we're already here, we used to have this button being disabled as a default state, which is correct, right? Because as soon as we type something, then it should be enabled, but as soon as it's not, then it should be disabled. This is the correct state. So we already have a listener for this field, and we could just do submit button and just checking that it's actually in the correct place, because yes, submit button is here, so it's all good. JavaScript will know about submit button. Submit button dot remove attribute disabled. We're basically saying, hey, if there is something typing going on and the field is not empty, then we want to enable the button. There you go. However, if the same thing happened, that the field became empty, then we want to set attribute disabled, and we need to also define the value of that attribute, which is true. This is correct. And then remove that. Yeah, nice, cool. So you might be asking yourself, if we have this on like event listeners and everything, why did we add this check here of if data length blah? So let me show you that a disabled state of a button is not guaranteeing you that it's not going to be submitted, because people can just go into the DOM, remove the attribute, and the button is enabled again. And if you don't have a check within your code, within your JavaScript, within the submit event, before you send something to the API, then this can be like played with from the console, from the DevTools. Kind of like treat whatever we're disabling in the UI, it's just more of a visual feedback, but this should not be the only way, like the only, the only check that is there before things go to your API, to your database or something like that. So always double check. So now that we have our proofing going on, let's check what we have if we submit the correct thing. So let's say we're just gonna submit everything. Well, let's say JPEG. And let's go to the network. And we got an OK. And the preview is a QR code. So usually regular APIs give you some data back. But in this specific API, we're getting an image back. And we can see that through a thing called headers. And in this case, the name of the header is content type, image PNG, which means that if we actually copy value and we open a tab and we go in here, right? We have the HTTP, blah, 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 everything we built, and we click on enter, then we're still getting our image. The URL that we have constructed is there to download a preview of an image, kind of, to the page, right? Not to our machine, but just to the page to show you or to show us to the user. So our fetch actually is not going to be working with any data, because usually you can have like fetch and then response on JSON. I think we had that in the fetch thingy. Here you have response.json. We have nothing to do .json on. What we will do, because we still want to check if our URL param went through, if it was okay, we are still going to do a .then, and we're still going to check the response, but we're going to check what type of response it is. So if you remember, responses have statuses. So we can check if the response status is 200, which means that it's an okay. If the status code is okay, then it means that we can proceed and do something more with the URL that we have already constructed. So if response.status is 200, then let's say display QR code. And if it's not, then I guess it's gonna hang. We're just like brutal. Let's create a const display QR code. And what we need to pass to the display QR code is our full URL that we just called the API with. So basically the fetch request that we did was kind of like to ensure like, hey, is this fetch request is okay? Do I get a status of okay after I've done it? Because if yes, then I can proceed with my UI and I can be sure that in this URL, there's going to be an image that I can display to the user. So let's collect our, well, first of all, I need to remove this trailing thingy because I think that's just messy. The question mark can go straight after this thing. If I'm not wrong, wait, let me check. What if I'm just like messing with you here? Yeah, it went through. Cool. So let's extract this thing because this is what our display QR code needs. It's the full URL that we have called the API with. And let's just write it in const full URL. And then in here, we can just use full URL just simply as the variable name. No string interpolation needed. Save it. And now here we're going to expect it as an image URL. And the next thing, what we're going to do is add it to the HTML. So before we're adding it to the HTML, we need to create a little bit of HTML first. So let's go to the index.html. And after we have our section, remember I told you we're going to have two sections. So it's time to create the second section. The second section is going to have an ID of QR code result. It's also going to have a class of a container, but it's going to have container back. The first one had container front. Where is it? There. We can actually close it. it had container front, and this one is going to have container back. Now inside of it, we're also going to have a header. So just kind of like the same structure as we had with our other one. We also had a header. Maybe let's just copy that one actually. Close it and paste it here. Let's just change it to your QR code is ready. Scan this image to see it in action, right? Exciting. Then what we're gonna have is we're gonna have our image tag. The source is gonna be empty. The alt tag is gonna be QR code, and the ID is going to be QR code image. Save that. We need to go to the style because I told you that we're gonna have a little bit of changes here, and specifically in the container. I'm gonna paste a chunk of code, which is basically going to enable to do this kind of like flippy thing. Because if you check now, this is what we're getting. This is not beautiful. This is not what we want. We're Anyway, I pasted this. Basically it adds a little bit of the transition. It puts a position of absolute, top 0, then like overflows and things like that. I've gone with that. I actually was doing that yesterday, trying to figure out how to, I didn't do this all by myself, right? Found again some code pen, then like another code pen, then another code pen, and tried to figure things out how they work together. Got this one. Also have a container front and container back, and we need to add the classes to it. This is also going to be a copy paste, so let's see what we're having. We're having .container front .flipped. We're going to be adding a .flipped class to our container in order to say that, hey, flip them. Right? Because we don't have any hover effect, we don't have anything. We actually have an action that once we have a QR code, we want to flip them. So container front.flipped is gonna be rotated, and then the container back initially is in the same position to which the container front is gonna be rotated. You know, so imagine like there's an axis here and there are things here, like from both sides, and you're kind of like rotating them, right? So you need to define that this one has the state that this is gonna be rotated to, and this one is going to be rotated to. You get it, right? Basically, that's what container back.flipped is doing here. Rotate to 0, minus 180 degrees and 180 degrees. It works. So I think. Let's go back to our script. In the display QR code, we are going to add the flipped functionality. So let's first get our containers. Const settings container document dot query selector QR code settings. Then we have results, and this is QR code result. It's just result, right? Result and settings, yeah. Makes sense. And we also want the image. QR code image, and this is QR code image. Settings container is going to be class list dot add flipped, and same is gonna go for result. Let's name it result because the code result. So let's see if that works. Let's put it here. Boom. Nothing worked. All right. Fair enough. Why? I would like to know. So the best way to check it would be to refresh, go to elements, and select the container and click. Oh, it did work. I just didn't update it. Okay, that's always nice. Okay, nice. It's a little bit slow because my laptop is really doing a massive job right now, recording all of this and working all of that. So our QR code is missing because we didn't add QR code image dot set attribute, because source is an attribute, and you define the source, the name of the attribute, and then we're gonna put the image URL in it, right? Because that's what we want to add. So if we refresh, blah, 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 boom, boom, there we go. Now let's add some styling to make it a little bit nicer. While I know this is not a setting, we are gonna reuse the setting because it's kind of like unified. across our previous UI, so like of the other card side. So let's just use that. Then we can also add some info, like right click on the image and select save image as, like this, to download the file. Then we can also do, or need to make some changes, question mark. Then let's give them a button where we can write go back. The button is going to be ID edit, because technically that's like an editing thing. Let's not forget to wrap it in a class called CTA, because again, we're gonna reuse the styling we have already created. And the type is, actually it can be a button, but I'm just gonna go with submit for simplicity. So let's try one more time. Generate, boom. There you go. How beautiful is that? And now if we're gonna click on go back, we need to arrange the backflip, that needs to happen. And we're sort of done almost. Okay, first let's do the class for info, because it's a little bit lacking on styling, a little bit neglected. .info. We want to have a text align off center, then some margin top, 0.2 rem. If you forgot the ridiculousness, it's back. Font weight of 200, font size 1 rem, width of 80%, and a margin 0 auto to center it. Also, the image setting image, since that's the only image we have, so we can be bold about saying dot setting image. I want it to be of a width of 90% to make it a little bit smaller than the, like, you know, and center it. So it's again margin 0 auto. Also, I forgot one class that I see here, and it's for the focus on the input error. Because so if it's like this and it's in focus, then it still should be red until it's out. Okay, so I think this is kind of it in the styling regard. So we added the edit button, but we don't have any functionality for it. So let's go through the regular drill, and we do const edit button, query selector dot, I'm already tired. Document, okay, const add edit button event listener, because we have consistency in naming, right? And we're gonna do edit button dot add event listener, and it's gonna be click, and we're gonna call on edit like this. And don't forget to call the function. Now on edit, what we want to do, we want to basically flip everything back. We don't care about removing things or adding things, because things are already there. And if the user is going to change some parameters because they actually edited them, and going to click again on generate QR code, then we're going to receive a new image and put the new image and then flip it. So we kind of like already took care of everything except of just flipping back and giving the user again access to the settings UI. So where was our flipped? Here. We're just gonna do remove and remove. Save it, and let's test out our app. Let's also remove the refresh. Save it. Okay, now we can fully test it. Okay, no, wait. Now refresh, and let's go. Let's say we want to redirect to the ultimate API challenge.com. I wanted to main color to be bluish something, and the background can be I guess, because it needs to have still a good contrast, you know, so it's gonna be picked up. The size, let's do like a 600 and some margin of like 10 maybe. And want an SVG. Let's submit. Boom! Wait, let me check that. I wanna put my phone here and I wanna scan it and I'm gonna see what I'm getting. Can I do like a screenshot? Yeah. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's basically, if you see like the yellow thingy, that's the ultimatechallenge.com. Our QR is working. Now let's check the go back. Hey, look at that. Freaking awesome. So happy for this one. And look, it was all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All right, so this is it. We actually made it to the end. Only HTML, only CSS, only JavaScript. A little bit of fetch to check that our request is okay, but apart from that, how awesome is that? I'm really happy about this challenge because I think it is indeed the beginner friendliest challenge from the API challenges, and I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions, always leave them in the comments, because not only that I can answer you there directly, also other people can learn together. I'm accepting requests for next challenges, for improvements, feedback, as always, super welcome, super appreciated. I hope you learned a ton, that you got a little bit more comfortable with APIs if that was your first API challenge and first work with API. I do recommend to go through the reading list that I left in the Ultimate API Challenges page project, which is linked in the description box below, because there is a lot of like things that you can still go through, you know, once that you have seen them in action. For example, the URL params, fetch, basically anything that you find there. Oh, the get, put, post thingies, requests from the APIs, things that could improve your knowledge, especially after you have used them in a project, so you can at least, I don't know, I feel like it's easier to read about something once you have seen the use case for it. I hope that can help. Anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this as much as I did. I had a lot of fun recording this, and also if you come from my Instagram, then thank you so much for all the feedback that you gave, that you are looking forward to this challenge, because this made me go through this challenge. Like the creation process was like speed of light. So thank you again, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I'm gonna wish you a good day, evening or night, wherever you are. Stay safe and see you next time. Bye.